Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your guest host, Mattie Stremic. And today I'll be joined by James Kaikis, co-founder of the PreSales Collective and Academy and founder of this podcast. The title for today's episode is 2 years and 125 episodes later, a conversation with James. It's hard to believe, but it's been 2 years since the podcast started. And in that time, we've had almost 167,000 listens. There's been an immense amount of topics discussed and guests from all around the world. I invited James to join me to discuss the history of the podcast, how it's elevated voices in the profession, and the lessons he's learned over the years. I hope you enjoy.
Today's episode is sponsored by Consensus. Scale your pre-sales organization and deliver better experiences with intelligent demo automation. Experience an interactive video demo at goconsensus.com.
Hi there, my name is Eugene Agashi, co-founder of PreSales Collective, and I have big news to share with you if you're a pre-sales leader or an individual contributor early in your career. We recently launched 2 training and enablement programs aimed at helping you take your career to the next level. Both programs were created by pre-sales leaders with input from dozens of SC veterans across our community. Now, we'll be running cohorts each month, so if you're interested in participating, visit us at presalescollective.com/enablement to submit an inquiry, and we'll send you details about each program, including this curriculum and schedule. We look forward to working with you on growing your career and being part of your career journey. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon.
Welcome to the PreSales Podcast, James. How does it feel to be the interviewee on your own podcast?
Hey, Maddie. It's great to be here. I'm humbled to be a guest on my own podcast. I'm also a little bit nervous, honestly. I know that we've gone back and forth on should this episode happen, but I'm actually really excited about it because there's been so many amazing things that have happened through 125 episodes, and I'm really happy and looking forward to be able to talk about them. And I'm so happy to have you as the host of the podcast today. So it's a mixed bag of feelings.
Well, I am honored to be the host today. And it's funny that you're bringing up you're nervous to be interviewed. I'm very nervous to actually be interviewing you. I am also especially excited for this episode because I believe not only is an opportunity for us to reflect on what you've accomplished in facilitating this podcast over the last 2 years, but it's also an opportunity for us to celebrate all the lives and legacy of every person that's been on this podcast and has shared their stories and their journey into pre-sales. So with that in mind, I'd love to start there. What's your journey to pre-sales? How did you get where you are today?
I think like everyone else who joins the podcast and says the same thing is I had never heard of this job or this role. And I am especially proud of my journey because I have an undergrad degree in education. I have a master's in sports sciences and was working on an MBA before life happened and I moved to Hawaii and I worked in hospitality operations. I did really well in hospitality operations, and I think it was the baseline for my customer service and customer experience skills, but also operationally. I learned how to do things efficiently. And when I made a move to San Francisco to work in hospitality at the Grand Hyatt, I realized I'm in San Francisco. I didn't go to school for hospitality. I want to get into tech. And so I went to a hospitality technology company where I became a subject matter expert immediately. The company Revenate was an amazing company and the founders had some hospitality background, but they didn't have anybody who actually worked at a hotel on staff. And so I began to really lean into my knowledge to be able to say, hey, this is how you actually use the product. This is how we should be thinking about building the product. This is what customer experience was like. I was in implementation. We didn't have a pre-sales team at the time. And so when I was talking to these hotels, I would say I was in your shoes previously. And what happened is because I had that hospitality experience, they would bring me on calls in the sales side and I would do proof of concepts. I would speak the hospitality language and lingo with other hoteliers. And then I said, wow, this sales thing is pretty fun. And so I ended up becoming the first kind of SC at the time for Revenate, but then an opportunity at Showpad presented itself, a new company in sales enablement, building a US office. And I was the first hire there. I became the manager of the team within 3 months. And then I helped build that organization over 4 years before going to Salesforce and then starting the PreSales Collective. So it's been an incredible ride, an incredible journey. I feel like if I can do it, anybody can do it. And so I am proud to share that non-traditional background today.
What an incredible story. It's definitely inspiring to see how, career changers can leverage their own experience and it becomes a level of expertise in a pre-sales role. So I love that background, James. And I think it's so inspiring for so many that come from non-engineering degrees and non-engineering backgrounds. So thank you for sharing that. I would love to know when you started the PreSales Collective. I believe it was only a month after launching PSC that you decided to launch the PreSales Podcast. Out of all the endeavors and areas to invest your energy and time at that exact point, what led you to launch the podcast?
That's a wonderful question, Maddie. And looking back, I was a little bit aspirational in my goals and what we wanted to do with the PreSales Collective. And with PreSales Collective, like many founder stories, we wanted to create some sort of need in the market. We wanted to help people out. And so as Eugene and I were strategizing on the PreSales Collective, we thought, hey, what medium should we invest in? It was blogs, webinars, and a podcast. And we started with the webinars and the blogs because we wanted to put quality content out there. And the reality is we wanted to create noise. We wanted to flood the market with content. So people would be like, oh, wow, this PreSales Collective, they've got a podcast, they've got a webinar, they've got a blog. It allowed people to get to know us at a personal level. And I think the podcast gets to know me at a deeper level and my philosophy and thoughts. It was one of these things that I joked with Eugene. I was like, oh, it won't be that hard. I'm going to block off my weekend and meet with people every hour. And here we are 2 years later, it has snowballed into something entirely different. It is amazing to think about that. One, we had no idea like what a great blog looked like, how to run a webinar, what a podcast looked like. And now we've got 125 episodes. And it's been really fun because we are showcasing people in this profession. And that has been the most important and valuable thing for me. I get to talk to people every day who are doing incredible things. And there are so many amazing pre-sales professionals out there, but they haven't had a platform to help them or highlight them or showcase the work that they're doing. And so I feel like we kind of took it upon ourselves with the podcast to be able to bring these stories to light, because I mean this respectfully, but prior to the PreSales Collective, there weren't really a lot of people speaking about this profession. There was a few people who were experts and have done amazing work over the last couple decades, but we needed to highlight the people that were in this role on a day-to-day basis. And so I feel like for me, that was the genesis of this. It's like, let's talk about people who are doing innovative things that are defining what great looks like and share their stories across our global audience. And then again, it snowballed into something that I really didn't know, what would take shape of. But I feel a level of responsibility and accountability to continue the podcast, to highlight these amazing people. So that's really been the journey from start to why it continued.
I will say, James, 125 episodes in 2 years has overachiever written all.
I would be lying if I didn't say it's been a challenge, right? It's been really hard to be able to do the podcast consistently at high quality, but it gets easier when I have great people on the podcast. I just get to be a pre-sales person and be curious and ask them questions. So it's been a fun ride.
Conducting discovery on your own podcast.
That's it, Maddie. That's it.
One thing I want to call out is it's been really interesting and an honor to get to sit in some recent podcasts that you've been doing live and then to get to co-host with you and now be hosting today, because I've gotten some exposure into what goes on the back end to ensure that you have meaningful conversations and that you really elevate the voice in front of you. One of the things I wanted to call out is I believe I counted 42 women that have been interviewed on your podcast. And to your point earlier, as far as maybe there being several voices that have been kind of main players within the profession, none of those happen to be female. So that's one thing I wanted to really point out and applaud you for, is your intentionality and also elevating voices in general, but elevating female voices as well. Did you have any idea that going through this podcast and starting it and having these conversations with all these pre-sales leaders would turn into what it is today? Did you have any idea this podcast was going to be what it is now?
I appreciate the compliment, the intentionality. I think that's something that's really core to who I am. I really didn't, right? Even when people ask me about the PreSales Collective and they say, did you think it was going to be what it is today? I really didn't. I thought it would be successful, but I think how I've lived my life is success is always moving. It changes based off where you are in your life. And for me at the time, success was starting the podcast and actually highlighting the people in the profession. And that still today exists, but now it's more about being consistent and continuing to get our message across and highlight these folks that are in this profession. And, as I think about the podcast from the beginning, like the podcast has evolved and it hasn't evolved. We have continued to stick true to this concept of a topic and then an expert in the topic, highlighting their expertise and allowing that individual to showcase what great looks like. And I felt like this needed to be our approach to allow our listeners to join in at any time and really to know the outcome of every episode, because episodes end of the day are mostly timeless, right? You can come in and listen to them in any order. They don't get outdated because they're talking about what happened, last week or last month. Sometimes if you just have a guest, and I've been a guest on podcasts before, you're joining for that name and that title and their job. And you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. The questions could be all over the place. You might listen and be like, hey, I didn't really get anything out that. So if we focus on the topic, then I believe that there's a pure outcome and you can listen to them in any order. And as I talk about like what needs to change, I feel like this weekly release schedule has been really rewarding, but at the same time, I think it's near impossible for people to catch up on. I hear a lot of people tell me like, hey, I love the podcast, but there's just so many episodes I can't keep up. I pride myself in quality, right? I really want to make sure that I'm doing a good job each and every time. I'm bringing the same energy, the same curiosity to every episode. And so I think that like, as we talk about changing the podcast, we'll probably move to a little bit lighter of a cadence to make sure people can catch up, because the data actually shows that people still listen to this podcast from episode 1, episode 2. Those episodes still get listens, and then you see people start to skip around. And so I know that people want to catch up. And I think as we think about what this podcast is and isn't 2 years in, I wish everyone listened to all 125 episodes before, 126 comes out. And that's something that we're really actively thinking about, myself, you, and the PreSales Collective.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And to be honest, I don't know how you've kept a weekly cadence up to this point, but that's so true. And to be honest, a lot of times when people are asking my advice on different topics, I love searching through the podcast and referencing ones that I've listened to and also looking for ones that maybe I haven't, just because the way that you structure the podcast, you can always count on those clear takeaways and that you're bringing in experts on those particular topics. So I definitely resonate with that. When you think about all of those conversations and the time that's gone by, how would you say you've grown personally?
That's a loaded question. Where do I start? I think from a podcast perspective, I had no idea how to start a podcast, right? I had no idea what went into a podcast, how to make a quality podcast. And now we're doing, 8 to 10,000 listens a month, which is, really incredible. Sure, you hear other podcasts that get millions of views, but when I think about the impact that this podcast actually makes, it is really incredible. Not to call it out, but I feel like my interview style in the beginning, I was a lot more rigid. You could tell I was a little bit timid and nervous in my early episodes. Now I feel like it's a lot more of a fluid conversation, right? I have a couple of things that I want to get out of every episode and highlight from the expert that I'm talking to. So that requires a little bit different of approach. You've actually shadowed some episodes that went completely unscripted. We didn't even talk about some of the questions, and it was just such an organic, fantastic conversation. I think being able to do that on the fly is something that I've been able to do after 125 episodes. It's also the curse of knowledge. I can now say, hey, this is the theme that I want to talk through, and I can get questions together in 20 minutes or a half an hour and, at least get the main approach for the episode. But if I think about myself personally, I have to be extremely transparent, but the last 2.5 years of PreSales Collective have been the most meaningful yet challenging times of my life. I feel like I've grown so much as a leader because I went from leading pre-sales teams in a startup and focusing on discos and demos and customers, problem solving, managing sales, to now running a community and a business at the end of the day. and being able to put out content across the world. And again, I have to be vulnerable. Who am I to sit here and tell people what great looks like? Who am I to be able to say, hey, you should be doing this? And I think that's been a challenge for me to overcome, to be able to say, it's not about me telling people what to do. It's about creating the platform that allows experts to be able to tell people what they think about a subject or provide their opinion and allow our audience to make a decision for themselves. And, how I always think about everything that we do at the PreSales Collective is win, win, win. And I've never publicized this, right? But in every decision that we make, how is it a win for our members, first and foremost, right? How do our members find value? And then for us, like as PreSales Collective, how is it a win for us to be able to reinvest in our team to grow and scale? I mean, we have 9 full-time people now. Some people still ask me if this is my full-time job. Like, we got 9 people on this team. Like, we've got a dozen part-time people who help make this thing possible. Like, there's a lot that happens behind the scenes. And then a win for our partners and sponsors to drive ROI and to help grow this ecosystem, because we're all working together. I will look back at this period of my life as probably the most meaningful and impactful time of my career, because I have been stretched. And that was what I was looking for when quitting my amazing job at Salesforce to start my own business with Eugene. I'm proud of the growth that I've gone through. I have a lot of growing to do and a lot of learning, and it's just been different stages, but it's been a wild ride, to say the least.
Well, James, I appreciate the transparency and want to dig a little bit deeper on something you brought up, which really goes into giving a platform and a voice to the profession. And what I love is that there's no doubt that your personal brand has just exploded. I think I knew who you were the moment I found the PreSales Collective, but your desire and the mission of the PreSales Collective really elevate voices in the profession, I think is so important, and would love to know, of all the pre-sales leaders that you've interviewed and worked with over the last several years, what are some of those lessons learned that you'd love to share with everyone on the podcast?
I think to start, I want to highlight that at our core, we have to make decisions on what's important to us and what our values are. I posted about this recently on LinkedIn that I thought being in tech sales and solving people's problems with technology was the job that I always wanted to have. But I've realized that being within communities, within tech sales and technology, has actually been even more impactful and rewarding. And if I think about the impact that I can make on people, it's about a legacy, right? At the end of the day, if I can play my role in making the world a better place and actually help people get jobs and help people perform better at their jobs, promotions, go home for dinner with their family on time, get more free time back in the day, then I've done what I needed to do. And because of that approach, I have learned so much from so many different people on this podcast. And I just can't begin to say how many people are doing incredible work out there. I mean, innovative work for some of the best companies in the world. Because many of us work in tech, we're so used to seeing these big names and these big logos on TV and their commercials. But like getting insights to the people who help run these companies, I mean, mind my language, but holy shit. I mean, the things that some of these people, the problems that they're solving, the innovation that they're tackling, it is incredible. And I am so happy to be highlighting those people. And what I've learned is it's not just the big companies and the big logos that are doing great things, small companies, mid companies. I've worked with companies that were not on the radar when we recorded the podcast, so they got involved in PreSales Collective, and they've grown substantially over the last couple of years. I mean, some of them have even gone to IPO. At least from a middle stage company to IPO. And it's been really rewarding and eye-opening. One of the things that I've learned is just because you're at a big company with a logo, like doesn't mean that they're not tackling some of the same problems. And that has been the eye-opening moment for me, is that, and I mean this respectfully, a lot of people assume that companies have everything together. They got it all together. They've got it figured out. But the reality is that there's issues and problems no matter what size of company that you're at, and they change. Some companies and some people who've been in this profession are tackling problems that, they tackled differently 5 or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I have this saying that the world is evolving around us. We need to evolve with it. What got you here won't always get you there. Learning what some of these people are doing and the problems that they're solving, I just still feel like the PreSales Collective can be such a great place to foster environments of learning. One of the things that I always prided myself on as a pre-sales leader was like art of the possible. I have this formula as it relates to the PreSales Collective that when you have problem solving and you add an outside perspective, that's when you get innovation. We've been so insular within our own companies and talking to people in our companies, and that's great. But sometimes going outside our four walls allows us to validate what we're doing is true and right and accurate, but also allows us to challenge status quo. I think that's the best part about all these conversations that are happening. The ones that rise to the top are the people that are not okay with status quo. They are always trying to push the envelope. They're always trying to be better. They're trying to be innovative. They're trying to be best in class. And that type of aspiration is just meaningful to me. And I love hearing those stories because those people end up being trailblazers too. They set the tone for others, and others who might be behind that for maybe their own personal reasons or stages in life or their companies, they can aspire to be that. They can follow that person. I think that's been the biggest thing for me is the people who are really putting action out there in the profession.
I remember the first time that I listened to your podcast, and I was in pre-sales, a sole sales engineer. And I think that was the first exposure that I got to the PreSales Collective before I attended a webinar or even joined Slack. And it was the first time I heard someone talking about the things that I was dealing with at work. And I was in this little silo of just trying to understand, how do I do this better? And that was the first time that I actually got exposure to, hey, here's what other people are doing, and here's what could be even better. And so I love those lessons learned. I think that's so important. I think the profession is going to continue to evolve, and I'm excited to see how everyone evolves around with it. What do you wish everyone knew about pre-sales?
That this profession exists. Nobody goes to university or college or graduates high school and says, I'm going to go be in sales, right? Those are very few and far between. And you grow up with like, oh, sales has a stigma about it. So like, why would anybody ever want to be in sales engineering? I have been no stranger to being very vocal on the title alignment in this profession. And I respect everyone's viewpoint. And I love when people challenge me, right? Because like that's important to me to get different perspectives. And I'm happy to always reconsider my opinion. But my premise stays the same. Sales has a negative connotation, and engineering is a very intimidating title. So if you kind of distill that down to solutions consulting, while it doesn't have the jazzy engineering in it, I think it will bring more people to this profession. Sales is daunting. Engineering is daunting. I'm not an engineer. I'm an education major. I am literally in education and sports sciences, a sports administration theory degree. So like, what am I doing in this profession? I've stumbled into it. And I think if we can help get alignment around solutions and solutions consulting, people will aspire to be in this job. And that's what we want. We want talented people to say, I want to do that job. And so sure, your customers might not care about your title, but if we want to build a pipeline to the profession at a macro level, I mean, we are talking hundreds of thousands of people. And I know this is kind of crazy to fathom, right? But we have to get some sort of alignment so that somebody coming up from high school knows that this job is a career. Like I've presented at the National Society of Sales Engineers about why this profession is so amazing. I mean, people make more than doctors at times. You get to travel the world. You can make a lot of money. And we've actually seen this with PreSales Academy, and like people that are doubling, tripling, quadrupling their salaries from what they were doing previously. So I want to thank you for all your work with PreSales Academy, because that is just so amazing to see, and it's so rewarding. But at the end of the day, like I want to continue to drive awareness and drive talent and make this profession be a destination for people, not a hopping off point.
So many people are looking for engaging and meaningful careers where they don't have to sacrifice the quality of life of a decent paycheck. If I had known this existed many years ago, I think I would have made a lot of different decisions. But here we are creating more awareness so that others don't have to stumble into it. Now, when it comes to pre-sales resources, events, community, and even vendors, I love that you've always had the approach of the more the merrier. Can you talk a little bit about why you think maybe a scarcity mindset could be harmful within the profession?
I've put my foot down on this topic for sure. I believe in an ecosystem. I believe that an ecosystem needs to exist for success for everybody. And when people have a zero-sum mindset, it can be a detriment. And I mean this respectfully, but I feel like if you look at the pre-sales and solutions profession in 2022 today, it is just so new. We have one community. There's a couple of podcasts. There's a couple of vendors out there. If you look at marketing and you look at sales, there are thousands of companies that support people. And that ecosystem is what we need to get to. It is not a zero-sum game. There's so much opportunity for everybody, but we are in the early innings of creating this ecosystem. So that like, hey, this is mine mentality can exist, but it's not for the best interests of the people in the profession. As we talked about, like the win-win-win, if we put the people in the profession at the center of everything that we do, the rest will work itself out. I'm a competitive person. You all know as my team, when we do Gallup strengths, like competition's in my top 3, but it's not because I always want to win. It's because I believe that competition brings out the best in people. When you see somebody else doing something better than you, if you just like sit and watch, like, oh, that's great, that's fine. Or you can challenge yourself to be better, to say, hey, how do we be better? How do we stand out? This idea of, hey, this is mine, or this is yours, or this profession can't have all these resources, that's not going to fly anymore. And I think that we as PreSales Collective, and I am saying this on the record, like we are big enough now that we will do what we believe is best for the profession. Now, some people might not agree with that, but we're going to do our part in leading an ecosystem and trying to make everyone better. The rising tide floats all boats. And if we can continue to elevate everybody, it's going to be positive across the board. And some people might not be able to see that. Some people might not agree with my perspective here, but I firmly believe it. There's enough opportunity for everybody, and it's only going to help people at the end of the day. Think about it in your B2C life, right? If you could only go to one store to go and buy something, that would be terrible. You know, you can only buy one car and the dealership sets the price. That would be awful, right? You need to have options. And even if you can only go to 2 or 3 dealerships to buy a car, that would be tough, right? You're like, okay, there could be price fixing, the options are limited. But if you can go to dozens of dealerships and buy whatever car you want and different options on that car, optionality. It exists in our B2C life. It should exist in our B2B life. It should exist in the community life. So this is obviously something I'm very passionate about, but it's all about the people at the end of the day. And if you do what you believe to your values is right to those people, the rest will work itself out.
What an excellent mindset. I love what you said. Competition makes us better. What a great way to frame the idea of competition. Because sometimes, you mentioned competition is in your top 5 strengths. And sometimes people are like, oh, that sounds bad. But it's really not. And I love your perspective on it. I think the more the merrier. We're only going to get better as vendors and resources, pop up within the pre-sales profession.
I'm going to encourage anybody listening to this podcast to start something, right? If you're thinking about it, start something. You should do it right and you should do it well and support people. But that's what this whole thing is about. Like, let's support people. Let's create this ecosystem. Let's get to where RevOps was a couple of years ago, or customer success was 10 years ago. The solutions in pre-sales profession has that opportunity, especially with how sales is changing and how B2C behaviors are bleeding into B2B. I think the opportunity is there, and I'm super excited for the future.
I love your passion, and I find it personally very inspiring. James, you mentioned that the podcast may be evolving as well. Can you talk a little bit about what that's going to look like in the future?
The podcast, rest assured, is here to stay. This podcast will always live on. It's a core premise to what we do. But I do believe we need to make some changes. I think we're going to slow down our cadence slightly so people can catch up. I can tell you, with all of my being, that I don't think there's been a bad episode. I really don't believe that anybody has done a bad job on the podcast. I would have re-recorded. Like, if you know me, if it didn't go according to plan, we're re-recording. We're not putting that out there, right? And I have never had to do that. And I'm proud of that because I think everyone has come prepared and done a good job. So this podcast will exist. I encourage you to listen to every episode if you haven't. So we'll slow down our cadence a little bit. I believe in quality over quantity, right? We're going to make sure that all of our episodes are impactful and they're valuable. Consistency is really important. I would be lying to you if I didn't feel stressed and pressure to release every week. The moment I don't release for 1 week, like, what does that actually mean? I think it's very important for us to have consistency for our audience so that they know what to expect, when to expect it from the PreSales Collective. And as someone on the team know, I'm always trying new things, for better or for worse, right? We're always trying new things. And so I'm looking forward to doing some live in-person podcasts. I have some friends in the community space that are running these in-person event podcasts. They're awesome and intimate settings. And so I have some ideas and some different ideas of video podcasts over 2023. So I can't commit to when those are going to happen, but we have some ideas. I want to do special episodes, right? I want drops that happen midweek, right? They happen randomly on special topics and special themes. So actually on episode 124, we actually did a video. We did a video of a webinar that has done really well with the PreSales Collective because I thought it was pretty impactful and I wanted to try video. Of course, we ran into some technical issues with our friends at Spotify who don't allow you video unless you're big time, but we'll continue to try new things. And I have to be honest, I'm kind of tired of hearing my own voice, Maddy. And I think the podcast is ready for a new host, which is you. And I think I can't wait for you to run your own shows. I think we'll run shows together, but it's been great for people to get to know me. And I'm not going to go anywhere, right? I'll still be hosting some podcast episodes, but I think it's time that people get to know you because honestly, you're an incredible person, your passion, the impact that you made. I want people to get to know Maddy at a level that they know James from the podcast. And so I'm excited to have you hosting in 2023. So it's kind of a surreal moment to be at 2 years and 125. And I'm not a person who stops and smells the roses. I've been telling myself to do it for the last 10 years. But I think reflecting back, I'm incredibly proud of what the PreSales Collective has done and the impact and the podcasts and the growth the podcasts have. And, you know, as we talk about like bringing up amazing professionals, now it's your turn to run the show. You know, at the end of the day, right, it's all about people and impact and elevating people and people who go through Leader Elevate when they're like, my philosophy as a leader is to help my team reach their potential and continue to see things in people that they might not see in themselves and give them that avenue, give them that voice, help them get there. I think it's about time for me to take on a little bit different of responsibilities within PreSales Collective as we continue to grow and scale. And so, you know, I'm not going anywhere per se on the podcast, but I'm happy that you're arriving, Maddy. So that's where I see this podcast going in the future.
Well, I am happy to be here. And I know my goal in any future episodes that I'm able to participate in is to follow in your footsteps of really making sure that we're facilitating meaningful conversations and highlighting others who are in the role and doing innovative things like you share. That is absolutely my goal. And I think you've developed a really incredible atmosphere on this podcast. And so it's amazing to see where it's gone the last 2 years. And I'm excited for where it's going to be in the future. And I'm so glad you're not going anywhere because it wouldn't be the podcast without James Kaikis.
Thanks, Maddy. No, not going anywhere, but we're kind of changing, right? Bringing you into the fold. And I know you're going to do a great job. I have this saying, I've got a lot of sayings. One day we'll write them all down in one place. But, you know, if you don't have respect for your work, how can you expect others to respect your work? And I think that's always been our mentality on the podcast. And I know that seeing you firsthand with PreSales Academy and Foundations program, you'll continue to do that. And so I'm excited to just switch up the podcast. So for those who've been listening to all the episodes, I really appreciate the support and I appreciate you tuning in to me each and every week. But it'll be good to have new voices and new individuals talking about the things that matter in our profession. So I'm honored to have you as a co-host into next year.
So you mentioned doing some video podcasts in the new year. Do you foresee any of those also landing on TikTok?
We will have to see. I mean, look, if there's anything that I would say that I'm good at, it's trying new things and figuring out what works to break into our audience. And all who know me personally know that I've retired from social media beyond LinkedIn. I would be happy to make a cameo on TikTok if it's going to help the pre-sales professions brand continue to grow. I think we can work on that, Maddy.
Well, if we're going to create awareness, I think we got to evolve with the times, James. I think maybe we'll need to get some of those on TikTok.
All right. You got my commitment verbally to 10,000 people. You got it.
Perfect. TikTok is coming 2023. One of the things that you called out earlier, you said to anyone who wants to start something new, to innovate. So my last question for you is, what advice do you have for folks who are actively trying to develop themselves and potentially develop a new product or solution or new podcast within the profession?
The best bet that you can make is on yourself. Control your own destiny. Imposter syndrome is real. We talk about it all the time in the PreSales Collective. Sometimes you just got to take a chance, and you can start small. If you're looking for what to do to get started, get active and get engaged. Just talk to people. Like PreSales Collective, we have a Slack with 10,000 people, right? There are 25,000 people signed up across the globe as of this episode. Join the Connections platform and meet other people. Talk about what they're doing. Be curious. And the reality is, focus on your personal brand and raise your hand for opportunities. PreSalesCollective.com/contribute exists so that people want to get involved and engaged. They can do that. We don't cherry pick and say, oh, let's only use this person and this person. We have a lot of the same people who raise their hands continually, and we give them the opportunity, but we give a lot of people opportunity. And so if you want to get engaged, you want to get involved, then this is why the PreSales Collective exists. We exist to give you a platform. And I personally am here to support you. You can always reach out to me in Slack. You can email me. I would say don't message me on LinkedIn because my LinkedIn inbox is a mess. And I try to go through it a couple times a year, but it's kind of hard. But I'm here to support. PreSales Collective is support. Again, we believe that it's kind of better together, right? And as I mentioned, the ecosystem is important. It's hard to start. It is really hard to go from 0 to 1, but start small. Build a plan for success and find, your kind of board of directors, your people around you that will help you get there, that will help you hit your potential and reach your ceiling. So that's my advice, Mattie.
And it's excellent advice. Starting small, not doubting yourself, and just getting started. I think we can bring that into so many different areas in our lives, whether professionally or even personally. So I appreciate that perspective, James. Now we're officially at the end of this podcast. How does it feel to be 2 years and 125 episodes later?
It feels amazing. To look back at where we started to where we're at now, it really feels good. And as I mentioned, I don't stop and smell the roses. But for someone like myself, it's just motivation to keep going, right? The accountability and the responsibility, I love it. Give me it. We're going to keep it going and continue to get to, 200 episodes and ideally 300 episodes. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for interviewing me. Thanks for asking me to do this. Thanks for encouraging me to do this. And thanks for being a wonderful host, Mattie. I can't wait for the community to get to know you better.
It's been an honor, James. Thanks so much for the opportunity. All right, PreSales Collective, thanks for joining another episode of the PreSales Podcast. It was a blast to hear James reflect on his journey the last couple of years facilitating this podcast and growing it from the ground up. I loved learning about the lessons he's learned over the years from interviewing pre-sales leaders and professionals. I think there's more than a few takeaways from our discussion, but I want to highlight one in particular. And that's whether you're in pre-sales, selling to pre-sales, or trying to break into pre-sales, it's not a zero-sum game. And I think we can all learn something from James in cheering each other on and seeing this profession grow. It was an honor to be your host today. Here's to another 2 years of elevating innovative ideas and diverse voices in the profession. See you next time.